If you think you have heard the most shocking story of injustice, you must wait until you hear this one. This is the story of a song that generated billions of dollars, and the 75-year-old man who wrote it, who never saw a single cent. What happened during that Super Bowl commercial would unravel a 50-year-old lie, a betrayal passed down from father to son. And when the truth was finally revealed, nobody could believe how deep the theft had gone. Arthur was 75 years old. The regulars at the coffee shop just called him Merlin. That name was a ghost, a remnant of his one minor folk psychedelic hit back in 1971. Nobody remembered the song anymore. Nobody remembered the band. Arthur's body was a map of his youth, covered in astrological tattoos that were once bright ink but had now faded into his aging skin. A blurred Aries on his forearm, an Aquarius symbol that was barely visible on his shoulder. Those tattoos were the roadmap of his hopes, his dreams, and ultimately, his greatest betrayal. He now made his living, if you could call it that, playing his worn-out acoustic guitar in the corner of a small coffee shop, playing covers for the few coins tossed into his open guitar case. He wasn't playing for money. He had to play. Music was the only way he knew how to breathe. He had stopped thinking about money, real money, decades ago. Money was the thing that had been stolen from him 50 years prior. That Sunday night, Super Bowl night, Arthur wasn't watching the game. He had just finished his set at the coffee shop, slung his old guitar over his shoulder, and was walking home in the cold. It was halftime. Suddenly, from every bar he passed, from every open apartment window, the same sound erupted. At first, he couldn't recognize it. It was too loud, too modern, polished with heavy bass. Then he stopped. He froze on the sidewalk. It was a technology commercial, a sleek billion-dollar phone ad. But the music was his. That was his guitar riff. That was his voice, sampled and twisted. But it was him. It was his song from 1971, the one recorded in a basement studio when he still had all his dreams. Cosmic Dust Traveler. It was playing right now in front of the entire world, in the most expensive advertising slot on the planet. Arthur didn't feel joy. He felt like he had been punched in the stomach. That song immediately brought back the burning, acidic pain of 50 years ago. He remembered his manager's face. Vinny, the fast-talking man with the shark-skin smile, who had promised them the world. The man who said he was taking the master tapes to a big record label in Los Angeles, and then never came back. He vanished. He disappeared with every right. All the music, the band's entire soul. Arthur and his bandmates were destroyed. They imploded. Arthur's career in music ended that day, before it even began. Before we continue with this unbelievable story of betrayal, if you love jaw-dropping true stories and battles for justice like this, hit that subscribe button right now, and let's find out how Arthur Sip's 50-year fight began. The next morning, the song was literally everywhere. It was viral. The retro sound was a massive hit. The technology company had the #1 song in the world, and it was a commercial. Arthur tried to go to lawyers. They laughed at him. This was his moment of absolute humiliation. This was the raw contempt. They looked at him. The faded tattoos, the threadbare jacket, the shaking hands. In the eyes of the system, he was just a senile hippie, a relic. They talked about the statute of limitations. They asked for proof. They demanded contracts. But Arthur had no proof. Vinny had stolen it all 50 years ago. Everyone laughed at him. Everyone except one person. His idealistic granddaughter, Maya, who was in her second year of law school. Maya had grown up listening to her grandfather's stories. She knew that song. She had the original, scratched vinyl record. For her, this wasn't just a case. It was a matter of honor. She could not stand seeing her grandfather belittled. She started digging. She researched the tech giant. She researched the ad agency. She tried to follow the copyright, tracing how the song was laundered through shell corporations until it landed with the tech company. But the real shock was not the theft. 2 weeks later, Maya ran into her grandfather's small apartment. She was pale. She was out of breath. She had found the name of the founder and CEO of the technology company, the wunderkind of Silicon Valley, a young, ruthless, brilliant billionaire. His last name, his last name was familiar. It was the exact same last name as Vinny, the manager who had stolen the master tapes and vanished 50 years ago. The CEO of this billion-dollar corporation was Vinny's son. This wasn't a coincidence. This was inherited theft. The war, 50 years later, was restarting, and now it was against 2 generations of thieves. Maya, fueled by the righteous anger of youth and the deep love she had for her grandfather, dove into her law school's database. She worked day and night. She drafted a cease and desist letter, claiming copyright infringement and demanding compensation for 50 years of stolen royalties. They sent it directly to the CEO, Vinny Jr. They expected a negotiation. They expected a quick settlement offer. What they received in return was an act of total war. The response came not from the company, but from a law firm, one of the largest, most expensive, and most ruthless law firms in the country. It wasn't an offer. It was a countersuit. They were suing Arthur Merlin, Blackwell, for defamation and fraudulent claims. The legal letter, narrator summarizes, claimed that Mr. Arthur Blackwell was a serial litigant and a known public nuisance. He wasn't, and that the tech company had legally and formally acquired the rights to the cosmic dust traveler masters from a legitimate holding company, which had in turn legally acquired them from the original publisher, Vincent Moretti Sr., Vinny. They claimed to have the contracts. They claimed Arthur was a liar, and they threatened to take his tiny apartment and every penny he had left. This was the moment the pressure truly began. It wasn't just legal. It was public. The tech company's PR machine went into overdrive. Tech blogs and social media influencers immediately picked up the story, but they didn't paint it as a story of injustice. They painted it as a senile hippie tries to scam tech genius. This was the belittlement phase. Arthur was humiliated. Photos of him playing for change in the coffee shop were posted online next to headlines calling him a greedy relic trying to cash in. The emotional trauma was immediate. Arthur stopped leaving his apartment. He was ashamed. Then came the family pressure. Arthur's own son, Maya's father, came to the apartment. He was furious. He begged Arthur to stop. He accused his own father, Arthur, of being delusional, of living in the 1970s. He screamed that Arthur was embarrassing the entire family, that he was ruining Maya's future legal career before it even started, by making her fight a billion-dollar company she could not possibly beat. He demanded Arthur sign an apology and drop the case. Arthur looked at his son, seeing the same fear and practicality that had defined his son's whole life. But Arthur's faded tattoos weren't just decoration. They were a promise. He told his son quietly that this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth. He refused to stop. His son stormed out, declaring him a fool. Arthur was completely isolated, except for Maya. Maya knew the countersuit was a bluff, designed to intimidate them. But they were right about one thing. Arthur had no proof. They had the legal high ground. Arthur and Maya needed the truth. They needed the rest of the band. It took them 3 weeks. The bass player was dead, but the other 2 were alive. They found the drummer first, Terry. He was living in a state-run nursing facility in Florida, suffering from severe diabetes. He was poor, sick, and terrified. When Maya and Arthur visited, he wept. He remembered the theft. He remembered Vinny. He wanted to help. He truly did. But he couldn't. He explained, his voice trembling. Narrator conveys that two men in suits from the tech company's law firm had already visited him. They had made a generous donation to the nursing facility to ensure his comfort. It was a threat. If he spoke, his care would disappear. He was trapped. Arthur felt his hope begin to die. But just before they left, Terry pushed something into Maya's hand. It was an old, warped cassette tape. It was a bootleg of one of their last practice sessions from 1971. Terry whispered that this was all he had left. They found the keyboardist next. Ben was not poor. Ben had cut his hair, put on a suit, and had spent the last 45 years as a successful and deeply bitter regional insurance salesman in Ohio. When Arthur walked into his office, Ben looked like he had seen a ghost. Then his face turned to stone. Ben wanted nothing to do with it. He refused to help. He narrated blamed Arthur directly for the entire catastrophe. He said Arthur was the one who was best friends with Vinny. He was the one who trusted the snake. Ben said he had moved on, built a real life, and he had no intention of digging up the bones of his failed youth, just because Arthur decided to fight a battle he already lost 50 years ago. He told Arthur to get out of his office. This was the lowest point. Arthur had been betrayed by Vinny, humiliated by the media, abandoned by his son, and now rejected by his own bandmate. He and Maya returned home with nothing but a worthless cassette tape. That night, Arthur sat alone in his apartment, holding his old guitar, unable to even touch the strings. He was experiencing a complete emotional collapse, the slow-motion breakdown of a 75-year-old man, realizing his entire life had been defined by one catastrophic failure. But Maya was a lawyer. She didn't give up. She sat in her tiny dorm room and listened to that warped cassette tape. It was mostly static and bad music. But then, between the songs, she heard voices. Young Arthur, laughing, and Vinny Moretti Sear, his voice slick and clear, talking about the master tapes. And that's when Maya heard it. A single line, captured by the ambient microphone. Vinny, promising the band that he was just borrowing the masters, that they were just going to make some copies, and that the tapes would always belong to the band. It wasn't a contract, but it was proof. It was proof that the band had never intended to sell the rights. This was enough to fight the dismissal. This was enough to force them into the next stage. Discovery. Depositions. The day of the deposition arrived. Arthur and Maya walked into the glass tower of the most expensive law firm in the city, and for the first time in 50 years, Arthur saw his past. Vinny Jr., the CEO, was exactly what Arthur expected. Cold, arrogant, tailored suit, and dead eyes. He answered Maya's questions, narrated with complete disinterest. He stated that his father, Vinny Sr., had founded a publishing company, that these tapes were that company's assets, that he inherited those assets when his father retired. He claimed it was a simple, legal business transaction. He had no knowledge of any band or any theft. He was claiming ignorance. Then, he looked at Arthur, and he made his mistake. He smiled that shark-skin smile, the same one his father had. He stopped the deposition and offered Arthur a humanitarian gift, $5,000, to thank him for his contribution to the music, and to go away forever. This was the contempt Arthur needed. The fire returned to his eyes. He narrated, calmly told the lawyers, that he wasn't interested in charity. He was interested in justice, and that he would see Mr. Moretti in court. Vinny Jr. Smile vanished. But the real fight wasn't with the son. It was with the father. 2 weeks later, they were in another room, this one smaller. They were deposing Vincent Moretti Sr., He was old now, almost 80, frail and thin, but his eyes were exactly the same. They were sharp, calculating, and held zero remorse. Maya began her questioning. She played the cassette tape. Vinny Sr. just laughed. He narrated, called it the ramblings of stoned children. He said it proved nothing. Maya pressed him. She asked him directly, "Did you purchase the rights from Arthur Blackwell?" Vinny Sr. smiled. He motioned to his lawyer. He said he had something better than a tape. The lawyer produced a plastic evidence bag, and inside it was a cocktail napkin. A stained yellowed cocktail napkin from a bar called the Wishing Well, dated 1971. At the bottom of the napkin, underneath a handwritten note that said, "I sell all rights to Cosmic Dust Traveler Masters to Vinny Sr. for good," was a signature. It read, Arthur Merlin Blackwell. Arthur stared at the signature. It was his. It looked like his. He felt the blood drain from his face. He didn't remember the bar. He didn't remember the napkin. He didn't remember signing away his life. Vinny Sr. narrated, explained calmly, that Arthur had been desperate for money that night, that he had sold his entire masterpiece for $100 and a bottle of whiskey. Maya's entire case evaporated. They had the signature. Arthur was destroyed. It was over. The law firm immediately filed for a summary judgment to dismiss the case, citing the napkin contract as ironclad proof. Arthur, humiliated and broken, finally believed he had done this to himself. He believed he had been a drunk fool and had given his life away, and his memory had mercifully blocked it out. He went home. He put his guitar in its case, slid it under his bed, and fell into a deep, dark despair. This was the emotional trauma climax. He was defeated. Weeks went by. Arthur didn't answer his phone. He sat in the dark. But Maya was not her grandfather. She didn't believe it. She stared at the photocopy of that napkin for 3 solid weeks. The signature looked right, but something felt wrong. She was a law student, but she was also a 21st century kid. She scanned the signature and used image software, comparing it to other signatures of her grandfathers from that era. It was close, but it wasn't perfect. Just as she was losing hope, her phone rang. It was an Ohio number. It was Ben, the keyboardist. Ben narrated, explained that he had read the news blogs. He read about the lawsuit, the deposition, and the napkin contract, and the fact that Vinny Sayer was not only alive, but brazen enough to produce that napkin, had awakened a 50-year-old rage in the insurance salesman. He told Maya he was ready to talk, and he told her the real story, the final, hidden secret. Yes, there was a napkin, but Arthur never signed it. Ben revealed the full truth of that night in 1971. The band hadn't just broken up. The band had confronted Vinny about missing money 2 days before he disappeared. They had voted, unanimously, to fire him. Arthur, as the band leader and Vinny's best friend, had delivered the news. Vinny had stormed out. That night, Arthur was devastated. He was guilty and heartbroken about firing his best friend. He went to the Wishing Well and got blackout drunk. Ben, the keyboardist, was the one who drove Arthur home and put him to bed. An hour later, Vinny Sr. showed up at the band's apartment. Knowing Arthur was unconscious, he was there to steal the master tapes as revenge. But he knew he needed cover. Ben was there, watching from the shadows. Terrified, he watched Vinny Sr. go to Arthur's desk, steal a real cocktail napkin from the bar that Arthur had stuck in his pocket, practice Arthur's signature 3 times, and then forge the contract. Vinny Sr. stole the tapes as revenge and as an investment. Ben had watched him do it. Maya was breathless. She asked Ben why he never said anything. Ben narrated, confessed his greatest shame. He was a coward. He was terrified of Vinny, who had connections, and Ben just wanted to escape that life. He ran to Ohio and never looked back. Maya asked him if he would testify to this. Ben said he would, but then he said something even more important. He asked Maya, "Did Vinny just show you the napkin, or did he show you the band agreement?" Maya didn't know what he meant. Ben explained. Before they ever hired Vinny, the four band members, hippie idealists that they were, had signed their own partnership agreement, a document they wrote themselves, stating that no band assets, music, or publishing could ever be sold or transferred without a 100% unanimous vote signed by all four members. A single signature on a napkin, even if it were real, meant absolutely nothing. It was legally worthless. And Ben still had his original notarized copy. The game changed. This wasn't a story of a forgotten contract. This was a story of a complex 50-year felony. The summary judgment was denied. The case went to trial. The courtroom scene was a media circus. Vinny Jr. and Vinny Sr. sat at the defense table, looking perfectly confident, surrounded by 10 lawyers. On the other side sat Arthur, in a borrowed suit, his faded tattoos visible on his wrists, and Maya, acting as his co-counsel. The tech company's lawyers portrayed Arthur as a failed, bitter musician, living in a fantasy world. They presented the napkin contract. It looked hopeless. Then Maya called Ben, the keyboardist, to the stand. Ben walked up. He was not the bitter insurance salesman anymore. He was the man he should have been 50 years ago. He narrated, summary, told the court the entire story. The firing, the forgery, the theft. The defense lawyers objected, calling it hearsay, the ramblings of another old jealous man. Then Maya presented the 1970 band partnership agreement. The defense lawyers had never seen it. Vinny Sr. had forgotten it even existed. The document was authenticated. It proved, unequivocally, that the napkin contract was legally impossible. Then Maya called the drummer, Terry. Terry, seeing Ben on the stand, had found his courage. He flew in from Florida. He narrated the agreement. He narrated that the voice on the cassette tape, the voice of Vinny Sr., promising the tapes were just borrowed, was recorded the day before the napkin was supposedly signed. The entire 50-year lie collapsed in one afternoon. The napkin was a forgery, and even if it weren't, the partnership agreement rendered it void. Vinny Jr. was staring at his father, realizing his entire billion-dollar company was built on a crime. Vinny Sr. was just staring at Arthur, silent. The judge's ruling was immediate and brutal. Narrated summary. The court voided the 1971 napkin contract. All rights, master tapes, and publishing rights for Cosmic Dust Traveler were ordered to be immediately returned to Arthur Blackwell and the surviving members of the band. Furthermore, the tech company was ordered to pay 50 years of back royalties, plus punitive damages for willful copyright infringement. The amount was staggering. Arthur wasn't just getting justice. He was getting hundreds of millions of dollars. The trial exposed Vinny Sr. to criminal charges of perjury and fraud. Vinny Jr. Sen's company stock plummeted, and he was forced to resign as CEO. The empire, built on theft, was ruined. But the story doesn't end with the money. Arthur and Ben and Terry used the vast majority of the settlement to start the Traveler Foundation, a massive legal aid fund for old artists, musicians from the 60s and 70s, who had their copyrights stolen by predatory managers and labels. The last time anyone saw Arthur, he was not in a fancy mansion. He was sitting in his same small apartment, which he now owned. The guitar under his bed was gone. replaced by a new one. He was no longer playing in the coffee shop corner. He was sitting in his sunny living room, teaching his granddaughter Maya how to play the riff from Cosmic Dust Traveler. His tattoos were faded, just lines on old skin, a map of history. But his music, after 50 years of silence, was finally, truly alive.